Hi, good day. This is Travon Patton. A lot of persons are familiar with me. If you're not familiar with me, hi. So I want to get straight into our theme, knocked down but not knocked out. And I want to use the story of Joseph to illustrate this point. We're going to find out some of the reasons why Joseph was knocked down, and we're going to see why God had it for Joseph to be knocked down in the first place and why he was not knocked out. So let's get right into it. I want to start off with Genesis 37. So if you guys have your text with you, we are going to go straight into Genesis 37. And I'm going to be reading from the English Standard Version simply because I like to break it down in a way where just a lot of people can understand it at the same time. So let's start off with some reasons why Joseph was knocked down. A lot of persons are familiar with the story, but we're going to kind of go into some point-by-point details, right? So Joseph was knocked down. The first point I would say Joseph was knocked down was because his brothers were jealous, right? He had a lot of brothers, and seemed for some reason they were really jealous of him, right? If we look at verses 9 through 11, we can see that even more. When Joseph, he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. What is some more evidence of his brothers being jealous of him? They ripped his robe. So if we go here to Genesis 37 verses 3, we can see that his father made him a robe. His father didn't make a robe for everybody. Now Israel, Joseph's father, loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. So this robe he gave to Joseph. Nobody else got this robe. So when Joseph came to his brothers, because he came looking for his brothers, when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore. And this is before they did something else to him that is another evidence of their jealousy towards him. And they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. So they threw him into a pit. You don't do that to people you like. Now, if this wasn't bad enough, they did another thing that is evidence of jealousy. They sold him into slavery. If we read verse 27, it said here, "Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers listened to him. And Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. So we have 3 points here. They took his robe, this being a point of contention. They threw him into a pit, and then they sold him into slavery. Now, they were planning to kill him. However, Judah stepped in. So their hate, their jealousy was to the point that they were willing to kill Joseph, but that was not God's plan. Let's move on to some other ways that Joseph was knocked down. We have all heard the story of Potiphar's wife. So Potiphar's wife was someone who liked Joseph. Joseph wasn't like no ugly fellow. Joseph was desirable. So she saw Joseph and she wanted him. Now, the big problem is she's Potiphar's wife. We don't even have a name for her. All we know her by is Potiphar's wife. And she wants Joseph for herself. Genesis 39 verses 6 through 9. Joseph was handsome in form and appearance, and after a time his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" Notice, he didn't even just say sin against Potiphar, sin against God. So Joseph knew that this isn't just something to wrong the person who was doing such a great service to me, such a great kindness to me. This was evil against God, and Joseph didn't want any part of that. Hence the reason why now Joseph is being knocked down. Potiphar's wife isn't hearing any of that, right? So how do we see her knocking Joseph down again? We can see that after she tries to seduce Joseph and Joseph flees, she lies on Joseph. So we can see here in verse 14, she called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house." So literally, she cried out so other persons could hear. She cried out so other persons who would have had a good, they would have had a good sort of idea of who Joseph was. They would have said, Joseph is a good guy. Joseph is upright. He's good. Potiphar could trust him, and Potiphar pretty much left everything to him. He's a good guy. So she literally came there to defame Joseph. She didn't just say this to one person, just Potiphar. She said this to all of the men of the household. Another way she knocked Joseph down was she destroyed Joseph's relationship with Potiphar. She literally went after the reason that Joseph had so much authority in the first place. So she went after his source of power, his authority, right? She went after his relationship with Potiphar. So if we look at verse 16 through 19, the text says, "Then she laid up his garment by her." This is Joseph's garment that she was able to hold on to when Joseph fled. She laid up his garment by her until his master came home. And she told him the same story, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came in to me to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house." Now this laugh at me thing might mean somehow in, some sort of rape, some sort of vile thing. So she's literally telling Potiphar, your servant who you appointed tried to rape me, tried to subdue me physically and have me physically, and I was able to get away because I lifted up my voice. He ran away, and this is evidence that he did this to me. So if anybody has been in a relationship or has a wife and that story came to them, they'll be furious. I mean, you're not going to say, "Oh honey, you're speaking foolishness. This can't be right. Let's go and weigh out things." No, this particular story would be something that would incense anyone who would have been kind to someone, and now to hear that they would try to do something like this. As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, "This is the way your servant treated me," his anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and placed him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. So we see that when Potiphar heard this, he immediately took Joseph, he put him in prison, and he didn't just put him in a regular prison, he put him where the king's prisoners were confined. So I want you to keep that as a note. I want you to put a pin there. Let's just go over the points again. How was Joseph knocked down in this instant? She lied on him. That's number one. She lied on him. She told everybody this big lie that Joseph tried to take her, right? Two, she destroyed Joseph's relationship with Potiphar. She destroyed that. And of course, needless to say, she caused Joseph to be imprisoned. He lost his job. He lost everything that seemed to have been going right for him. He lost that. he was now a prisoner. Usually when bad things happen to us, they come in that sort of form. People defaming us, saying evil things about us, saying lies about us. When persons have gone after your job, gone after your marriage, gone after your well-being. But this is all of the things that Joseph experienced in this span of time. Just when you thought that things were going well for Joseph, then comes Potiphar's wife. Then comes someone who seeks him, who wants him, but wants him for evil, something that is a great evil against not just Potiphar but God. And he stands up for righteousness, and boom, he's knocked down. His finances, his reputation, and now he's in prison. I want to now go to the reasons why Joseph was not knocked out. Because we discussed the reasons why Joseph was knocked down. But let's now discuss the reasons why Joseph was not knocked out. Let's go back to that point. Let's go back to that point where Joseph was put in to prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. I told you to put a pin there because that's very important. It's very important because my premise to you is that God was setting up Joseph. That was not a setback, that was a setup. He could have gone to regular prison. He could have gone to people stealing bread prison. He could have gone to people stealing fish prison. He could have gone to people, the baby daddy prison. He could have gone to any other prison, but he went to the king's prison. He went to the place where all the important people who was in the palace went. Ain't that something, right? But of course, if you're in that situation, you're still in prison. So there isn't any sort of good thing that you feel that could happen in this sort of position, but it's where God wanted him. He was put in the king's prisoner's prison. Alright? So let's move on from there, right? God was setting up Joseph to be in charge. I'll show you in these points, right? Favor. He set him there because he knew that he already put an anointing on Joseph's life for favor. Alright? How do I know this? Let's go in Genesis chapter 39. Let's start from verse 21. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. He was favored. So he was put over Potiphar's estate. He was put over Potiphar's estate. You stripped of that. Here, boom. He's now been put in charge of all of the prisoners. See here in verse 22? And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all of the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. Part of his house, he was good at that. Now, someone put him in charge of the prisoners, even though he himself was a prisoner, right? So, favor, alright? So let's look at positioning. Let's look at positioning. I'm going to take you over to Genesis chapter 40. Let's look at verses 2, and we're going to go down to 4. Alright? We see here in this chapter that the spotlight is on Pharaoh, and he's mad at a couple of his officials. So let's look at verse 2. And Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison where Joseph was confined. In the prison where Joseph was confined. Alright? So this is important. Position. I told you that he had favor. He was put over the prisoners. Right? So we put a pin there. Right? He was put over the prisoners. And now these important persons who are in Pharaoh's court have now been sent to prison. In the same prison that Joseph has been imprisoned, and in the same prison that Joseph is in charge of. Alright? So positioning. How do we see this positioning play out, right? I'm going to give you another word. Restoration. Restoration. So we saw favor, positioning. Now we're going to see restoration. This is how restoration is going to be beginning. So let's go to verse 21. I'm sorry I'm not reading out everything to you because I don't want this to be too long, because you are probably watching this from a phone or something like that. So I just want to move through the points quickly. So we see in verse 21, he restored the chief cupbearer to his position, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Alright, so this cupbearer was the official that was sent to the prison that Joseph was imprisoned in, that Joseph was in charge of. Now, this cupbearer was restored to his position. He was restored. This is the beginning of the restoration, this restoration process. So now, this cupbearer, who was now under Joseph, who was able to spend time with Joseph because he was put into prison with Joseph, is now positioned next to the Pharaoh and is now there, having met Joseph. So let's see how this is going to play out, because now the cupbearer is now restored. This is just the catalytic process. This is how it begins, right? Let's go to our next word. So we saw favor, we saw positioning, right? We saw restoration. Now let's take a look at revelation, right? So I'm going to go down to Genesis 41, and I'm going to go to verse 9 to 13. Pharaoh decides, he's going to go to sleep one night, and he has this dream, this really weird dream. Joseph would have been in prison with the cupbearer and another official who wasn't around anymore. He would have been with them, and they had dreams too, in prison. Joseph being in charge of the prison, they told Joseph their dreams, and Joseph was able to interpret it. Now, the Pharaoh was having a dream. So, this Pharaoh had this dream, and there was nobody in Egypt who can interpret this. And I got proof of that. If you go to verse 8 of Genesis 41, it says, So in the morning, his spirit, Pharaoh's spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was none who could interpret them to Pharaoh. There was nobody. Alright? So, we can see how this plot thickens, right? Because we can see that there was nobody who could have interpreted this dream. And who would have been next to Pharaoh? Who would have been positioned next to Pharaoh? Who would have been restored? The cupbearer. So let's go down to verse 9 to 13, as I aforementioned. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remember my offenses today, when Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard. We dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with his own interpretation. A young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. Revelation. He revealed to Pharaoh that there was a man that could interpret his dreams. He revealed to Pharaoh the gift that Joseph had. Let's go back over our points. Favor. Favor got Joseph into Potiphar's house. Joseph got into prison through Potiphar's wife, but favor made Joseph in charge of that prison. Joseph was in charge of that prison, the prison that the king's officials were sent to. Joseph was able to minister to two of the king's officials. One of them was restored just as Joseph revealed to him to revelation, that cupbearer did not forget that Joseph revealed his fate and revealed the fate of the baker. So when Pharaoh had a problem, the cupbearer was positioned after being restored to be able to tell Pharaoh that there was a man who can interpret his dreams. Favor, positioning, restoration, revelation, and let's now go to exaltation. Being lifted up. How did this happen? So if you can go to Genesis 41 verses 14, we can see how this begins. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. And guess what? And when he had shaved himself, and what? And changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. Joseph was already beginning the process of this exaltation. He was already beginning this process. He ready to get a clean shave. He gets some new clothes. He was getting ready to put on a show for the Most High. We would have seen Joseph would have told Pharaoh the meaning of his dream. And not only did Joseph tell Pharaoh the meaning of his dream, he gave him a solution. He gave him a solution that would make Pharaoh so happy. You know what? I'm just going to let the text speak for itself. In verse 37, this proposal pleased Pharaoh and all of his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this, in whom is the Spirit of God? Pharaoh even detected the Spirit of God in Joseph after Joseph finished talking. Pharaoh even discerned the Spirit of God. You know, the Egyptians served, many gods. Ra, Amun, Set, all of these, graven images. Isis, all of these things. But you could tell me at this moment that he was so impacted that he can say that the Spirit of the living God is in this man. Can we find the Spirit of God in anyone else in Egypt? And then in verse 39, Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. I tell you, when you talk about promotion, that is all this is, promotion. He was over Potiphar's house. He was over the prisoners. Now he's over Pharaoh's house. And what else? Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you. That means that nobody could touch Joseph. The only person higher than Joseph is the Pharaoh himself. The only person that could touch Joseph is the Pharaoh himself. And Pharaoh wasn't finished. And Pharaoh said to Joseph in verse 41, see, I have set you over all the lands of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand and clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain about his neck. Joseph just changed his clothes. Joseph just changed his clothes a couple minutes ago. And now you tell him he getting better clothes. Look how God does quick work. When God ready to move, quick work. So Joseph came in there, thought that he was already upgraded. He already took a shave. He got some clothes. Now we got a ring. Now we got a gold chain. Now we got the best linen in Egypt. Man, even today people looking for Egyptian linen. So right now, Joseph is experiencing the fulfillment. The fulfillment of this exaltation. See, it began with Joseph coming out of prison and getting fixed up. And now it's reaching that point where Joseph could see it. He could see it and he could feel it. He could see it and he could feel it in its fullness. As Pharaoh has clothed him with authority that no one else can be as powerful as Joseph in the land of Egypt, and he's now giving him the look too to go along with it. He didn't leave him in those same clothes. He changed his clothes. He changed his clothes. So now we see the fulfillment. But I'm not going to leave things there. Yeah, Joseph could be, all powerful in Egypt. He could look good, but all of this would not mean a thing without understanding God's grand scheme, without understanding God's will in all of this. God's will in the exaltation of Joseph is the last point that I have. Salvation. Salvation is the last point. So we had favor, we had positioning, we had restoration, we had revelation, we had exaltation, we had the fulfillment of this exaltation, and we are now seeing salvation. This is all what all of this was for. From the pit to the palace, this is all what this is for. And Joseph stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured. So what he was doing, he was gathering the grain. He was gathering the grain to the point that the grain cannot be measured. The 7 years of plenty that occurred in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come. As Joseph had said, there was famine in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. When all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph. What he says to you, do." What he says to you, do. So now the fulfillment of this dream is now coming to pass, and now all that Joseph has been doing is now time for that to pay off. He has the grain, the famine is here, and now the people need bread. Joseph has the answers. But not only has the people of Egypt been saved, God's true plan was for him to save his chosen people. So how do we see that? We go to Genesis 42 and we look at verse 1 through 2. We see, when Jacob learned that there was grain for sale in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another?" And he said, "Behold, I have heard that there is grain for sale in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die." So now this grain that Joseph has gathered has attracted his family's attention. Because why? There's no grain anywhere else. There's grain in Egypt, the grain that Joseph has gathered. Right? And let me show you how the plot thickens, right? Now the famine was severe in the land, and when they had eaten the grain that they had bought from Egypt, their father said to them, "Go again, buy us a little food." But Judah said to him, "The man solemnly warned us," Joseph, if you've read the story before, saying, "You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. So if you send our brother with us, we can go down and buy you food. But if you will not send him, we will not go down." For the man said thus, "You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you." Israel said, "Why did you treat me so badly as to tell the man that you had another brother?" See that this was the plan of God. So at the end of the day, Joseph was leading them back into Egypt by putting this criteria that you have to bring his brother. So this led them back. This led them back into Egypt, because if it wasn't for this criteria, they were probably not going to come back. So then, how do we see his will revealed in all of this? Let's go to Genesis 45, verses 4 through 11. So Joseph said to his brothers, "Come near to me." This is after Joseph reveals himself, that he is Joseph. He's the one that was thrown into the pit. He's the one that was sold into slavery. "Come near to me, please." And they came near, and he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourself, because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life." This is the plan of God. This is the will of God being revealed through Joseph. Yes, so for the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve you for a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and Lord of all the house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. So this is God's plan. God's will revealed in Joseph. That this was God's plan. God's plan for the salvation of his people. God laid up all of this for Joseph to be knocked down so many times, but not knocked out, so that God's chosen people, his remnant, will be saved. You have to say that I won't let go till you bless my soul. You have to look at challenging situations and not think of yourself, not think of what you're going through, but think, what is the big plan that God has up his sleeves? What is the big plan? What is the bigger purpose? You have to say, look, I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to quit because it's too hard. I'm not going to quit because it's taking too long. We can't quit because we were betrayed. We can't quit because we were talked about and mistreated. We can't quit because we lost a job. God's got a better position for you. He's getting ready to make you a fortune in your famine. He's getting ready to make you a fortune in your famine. He's getting ready to take you from the pit to the palace. So don't be discouraged when you see challenging situations happen. God has a bigger and better plan for you. He's going to make your test a stepping stone. He's going to make your test a stepping stone. And not only for you, but he's going to take others up with you. He's going to make his will prominent. Guess what? We can think it's all about us. But God has a bigger purpose when he puts us through things. Alright? He's done this to Joseph to save a nation. He's done this to Joseph to reveal his will. COVID is not your knockdown. COVID is to bring you into a land of plenty. It's to take you from famine and take you into fortune. But you got to trust God. You got to wait on him. You got to know that he is your strength. Alright? You got to know that this is his purpose, and if you're in his will, it's all going to work out for your good and for the good of his people. Alright? So, that's all I have for you guys. I hope you were encouraged by the message. God has a plan with you in it. Alright? Be blessed and enjoy the rest of your day.